At exactly 27 seconds in, the chamber detonated in silence. It was the kind of silence that rips open a room, pulling the air out of every pair of lungs at once. $2 million of stolen veteran benefits hung in the air like shrapnel, invisible but lethal. Words had not yet been spoken, but the knowledge was already there, suspended between the oak benches and the cold marble columns. Somewhere in that marble, you could almost hear the names of 800 families echo, waiting for release. And there, seated under the surgical lights of a congressional hearing room, Donald J. Trump leaned back with the confidence of a man who thought the blast had missed him. But the blast was only beginning. How do you destroy a fortress of lies built over decades without firing a single shot? The room breathed slow and heavy, as if it knew it was about to witness something it would never forget. The air bled a faint metallic tang, like the first seconds after a deep cut. Behind Jasmine Crockett, the walls seemed to lean forward, whispering secrets they had held for too long. Every chair creaked like it was straining to hear. Even the microphones seemed to hum in anticipation, ready to slice whatever words came next into the history they would serve. Trump's presence was like a storm cloud at ground level. His tie hung slightly crooked, the way it does when someone believes nobody dares mention it. His fingers drummed the table, but not out of boredom. It was the beat of a man rehearsing dominance, measuring the tempo of his interruptions. He had come ready to bluster, to wave away every allegation like a gnat in summer air. What he had not prepared for was Jasmine Crockett's brand of quiet devastation. She did not rush. She did not even look at him at first. Her eyes scanned the stack of folders before her, each one thick enough to hold a life's worth of ruin. The paper was cream stock, heavy, the kind that resists bending. In her hands, each folder seemed to breathe. Some were sealed with red twine, others closed with brass fasteners that caught the light like small, silent explosions. She set them out in a precise line, one by one, the way a surgeon lays out instruments before a procedure. In the gallery, the audience shifted. Veterans in worn jackets, teachers who had taken second jobs, mothers who had buried sons. Their eyes followed her hands, because they already understood that the truth was in those folders, and that today, truth was going to walk. Trump cleared his throat. "We're not going to waste time with fiction," he said, leaning toward the microphone with the casual arrogance of a man used to owning the room. His voice was the sound of a door slamming against the wind. Jasmine finally looked at him, calm, steady, like she was about to address a jury rather than a man. "Mr. Trump," she said, her tone so level it was almost surgical, "truth doesn't need your permission to exist." The words sliced. The silence that followed had fangs. The hearing room's lighting felt colder now, merciless, stripping away the warm tones from faces until only truth and fear remained. From the control room upstairs, producers whispered into headsets. Social feeds began to swell. Clips were already being cut, subtitled, and uploaded. Across the country, people who had been folding laundry or making breakfast stopped mid-motion, drawn toward their screens by something in her voice. She reached for the first folder. The paper rasped against the wood as she slid it forward. Her hands did not tremble. Her nails tapped twice on the brass fastener before she opened it. Inside were photographs, printed on matte stock, that absorbed the light rather than reflected it. A young man in uniform. A discharge paper stamped in bold letters. "Benefits denied." "This," Jasmine began, "is Corporal Marcus Ellison, age 26. Served in Kandahar. He came home to nothing. Not because his country could not afford to honor its promise, but because $2 million meant for him and 799 others was siphoned through shell accounts." Accounts, she let the word hang, that lead back to entities tied to your inner circle. Trump's smile flickered, just for a second. The kind of flicker you only see if you are looking for it. Jasmine was looking for it. In the gallery, Marcus's mother clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Tears tracked lines down her cheeks, catching the light like tiny glass beads. The walls seemed to hum now. The air was thick enough to touch. Every movement, every breath in that room felt like it belonged to the story unfolding in real time. Trump leaned in. "You have no proof," he said. But the words were slower now, as though they weighed more than he expected. Jasmine's eyes did not move from his. Her hand rested on the next folder, but she did not open it yet. Instead, she spoke in a measured voice, each syllable precise. "Proof doesn't shout, Mr. Trump. It waits. It waits for the right second to end the conversation forever." The producers in the control room mouthed the words silently, already knowing they would lead tomorrow's headlines. On living room couches across America, people repeated it to each other, tasting its weight. In that moment, the hearing room felt like the center of the country's pulse. Outside, on the Capitol steps, a small crowd had begun to gather. Some held signs with names. Others simply held photographs. Their voices did not yet penetrate the heavy walls, but the vibration was there, faint but growing. Jasmine reached for the second folder, the one tied with red twine. The knot was tight, deliberate. She slipped a fingernail under it and began to loosen it slowly, each twist releasing the air from the paper like a lung exhaling. Trump's eyes flicked to it, just once, before snapping back to her face. "You're not ready for what's inside this one," she said, her voice dropping just enough for the microphone to pull everyone closer. "But you will be." And then she closed the folder again, sliding it back into the line. The message was clear. The truth would arrive on her terms, not his. The crowd outside grew louder. Phones in the gallery lit up as people texted names, as hashtags were born without being spoken. In a small apartment in Detroit, a veteran named Harold switched off the stove and sat down heavily, eyes fixed on the screen. In a classroom in Phoenix, a civics teacher turned the volume up, letting 30 teenagers hear the sound of democracy sharpening its blade. Inside the hearing room, the silence had teeth again. Jasmine looked down the line of folders, then back at Trump. "We will get to the daughter," she said evenly, "and we will get to your 27 seconds. But first, we will get to every single person you thought was too small to matter." The marble held its breath. Somewhere in the back of the room, a camera clicked, the sound like a trigger being pulled. The silence had not even settled when Jasmine Crockett's fingers returned to the red-tied folder. The crowd outside was now a living drumbeat against the Capitol walls, the chant of voices bleeding faintly through the stone. Inside, the surgical light held steady, bright enough to make the moisture in Trump's eyes visible. She untied the knot this time without hesitation. The red twine curled like a vein cut free, falling limp across the desk. Inside were 2 documents, one thick stack of transaction records and a single sheet printed in oversized black letters. She held the single page aloft first. "This," Jasmine said, "is the authorization for a wire transfer of $3.5 million. It left an account marked Community Redevelopment Fund in Texas and landed in an entity whose ownership traces through 6 layers of shell corporations to the property trust of your eldest daughter." She placed the page down, flat, palm on top of it, as though pinning something dangerous in place. It was signed on April 3, 2021. The records beneath it were no less lethal. She slid them into view, their pages faintly warped from repeated handling. The ink had bled in spots where highlighters had lingered. She moved them, like playing cards, fanning them so the cameras could catch every heading: VA Housing Grant, Emergency Shelter Initiative, Veteran Rehabilitation. From the second row, an older man with a weathered face shifted forward. His name was Walter Graham, age 72, a retired Marine. His house had been condemned after his roof collapsed during a winter storm. "That money was supposed to put us back under a roof," he said aloud, voice cracking. "Instead, we lived in my truck for 9 months. His wife beside him nodded slowly, tears wetting the scarf wrapped tight around her head. Trump's hand went to the microphone. "This is a circus. That's not even my signature." Jasmine's head tilted slightly, her voice still steady. "Forgery would be a serious crime, Mr. Trump. You are welcome to confirm that in writing right now." She slid a pen across the table toward him without looking away. "But you won't." Social feeds flared instantly. Clips of the pen sliding across the wood, looped in living rooms, coffee shops, and subway cars. People texted it with captions, but you won't. Trump laughed under his breath, but it was the kind of laugh people use to fill space they no longer control. Jasmine turned the records toward the audience, giving them the view first, before the cameras took it. 800 veterans were approved for these funds, she said, her tone like a scalpel gliding without resistance. Only 60 received anything. The rest were told there were budget delays. Budget delays, while millions were routed through accounts registered to addresses in Florida, New Jersey, and one property in the Virgin Islands. Her hand rested on another folder. This one was pale blue, its edges curled like an old photograph. The paper inside was thicker than the others, its surface slightly rough. She opened it to reveal photographs, houses half repaired, roofs still caved in, mold spreading across drywall. In one, a child's tricycle sat beside a waterlogged mattress. "This is the home of Linda Cortez," Jasmine said. "Single mother, 2 children ages 5 and 8. They slept in a neighbor's garage for 11 months after being told their veteran housing funds had unexpected administrative holds. She found out last week why." In the back row, Linda raised a trembling hand. The cameras found her face. Viewers at home saw her close her eyes, saw the way her shoulders sank as if releasing something she had carried too long. Trump leaned forward again. "You think you can link me to every problem in the country? You can't." Jasmine's eyes didn't move from the photographs. "Mr. Trump, I don't need to link you to every problem. I only need to link you to one. One is enough when it's worth $3.5 million and 800 human lives put on hold." The gallery erupted not in shouts, but in the sharp intake of collective breath. It was the kind of sound that could be felt in the chest, a sudden compression of the air. Upstairs, in the control room, producers were already queuing up Walter Graham's voice and Linda Cortez's image for the evening news packages. Across the country, veterans groups began pushing out calls for a formal investigation. Jasmine gathered the red Tide folder's contents back into order, pressing them flat before setting them down. "We will now proceed to the next matter," she said, voice soft but carrying. "The one that makes the 3.5 million look small." She reached for a manila folder at the far end of the line. Its surface was smooth, but its weight made the wood beneath it groan. When she lifted it, the room seemed to narrow, the space between her and Trump drawing into a corridor only they could walk. Trump's eyes followed it. His jaw tightened. "Inside this folder," Jasmine said, "is the paper trail that leads directly to the daughter you have denied exists." The crowd outside roared, the sound finally breaching the walls. In that moment, the hearing room felt as if it might lift off its foundations. The room was still reeling when Jasmine Crockett placed the heavy manila folder between herself and Donald J. Trump, her fingertips resting lightly on its edge like she was holding back a flood. The marble walls seemed to lean in closer now, their cold patience pressing in on the 2 figures at the table. She opened the folder with deliberate slowness. The hinge of the cover gave a faint sigh, as though it had been sealed too long. Inside, the first document was not paper at all but a glossy 8x10 photograph. It showed a young woman with auburn hair, standing in front of a modest brick townhouse in Wilmington, Delaware. The resemblance in her jawline and eyes to the man sitting across from Jasmine was not subtle. "This is Alexandra Pierce," Jasmine said. "She is 28 years old. She is your daughter." Trump gave a short laugh, the brittle kind that cracks before it reaches the eyes. "I have no idea who that is." Jasmine slid the photograph forward, not to Trump, but toward the cameras, letting the lenses drink in the face. Born June 15, 1996. Birth certificate lists father as undisclosed. Mother, Caroline Pierce. Worked at a hotel your organization purchased in 1995. She reached beneath the photograph and pulled out a second sheet-thin, cream-colored paper that seemed to hum under the lights. The embossed seal at its bottom edge caught the light in a way that felt almost theatrical. "This is the certified copy of her birth record," Jasmine continued. "And these," she lifted 3 clipped pages from deeper in the folder, "are wire transfers totaling $500,000 over a 10-year period to an account in her name, originating from a trust controlled by your personal attorney." The audience murmured. the sound a low current through the benches. Trump leaned into the microphone. "You're dragging innocent people into this for political theater." Jasmine's gaze did not move from his face. "Theater requires scripts and actors. This is not theater. This is arithmetic and bloodlines." In the second row, a man in a veteran's cap muttered, "She's got him." The microphones didn't pick it up, but the energy in the room shifted all the same. Jasmine let the birth certificate lie on the table, then reached deeper into the folder for a sealed envelope. It was thick, the paper slightly yellowed, its flap held shut with a strip of red wax. She broke the seal with a slow twist of her wrist, the sound of tearing paper louder than it should have been. Inside was a letter, handwritten in looping script. "This letter," she said, "was written by Caroline Pierce in 2012, addressed to your chief financial officer. It details your visits, your agreements, and the arrangements made for Alexandra's education and living expenses. It is signed, dated, and notarized." She unfolded it, holding it between both hands as if weighing its contents. From the gallery came the sound of someone exhaling sharply. Upstairs, control room staff were already feeding Alexandra's image into split-screen side-by-sides with Trump's. Trump's hands tightened on the desk. "You're fabricating a story to distract from your own party's failures." Jasmine laid the letter flat, smoothing the crease with her palm. "Mr. Trump, truth doesn't bend because you don't like its shape." The words hit with surgical precision. Phones lit up across the chamber, capturing the moment from every angle. In homes across the country, people replayed the line twice, 3 times, sending it to friends with a single word, "Watch." She moved to the final document in the folder, a notarized affidavit from Alexandra herself. The pages were thick, each signature crisp and ink still slightly raised to the touch. She did not read it aloud, only slid it forward. "You may choose to read this privately, Mr. Trump, or I can read it into the record. Either way, it exists, and it will not unexist." For the first time, Trump's gaze shifted down, his eyes on the page rather than on Jasmine. His posture, once leaning forward in attack, now sat rigid, shoulders pulled back like someone bracing for an impact they could no longer dodge. Outside, the crowd's chants swelled, a steady thrum of "Show the truth" threading through the thick Capitol air. Veterans groups, teachers, and parents had merged into a single voice. Jasmine closed the folder, its weight now a quiet threat between them. "This is not the end of the evidence, Mr. Trump. This is the beginning. And before we leave this chamber, every dollar and every decision will be on the record." The silence that followed had fangs again. Camera zoomed tight on Trump's face. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. Before the echoes faded from Jasmine Crockett's last words, she reached for the stack of remaining folders like a chess player advancing a queen into enemy territory. The lighting above seemed even colder now, surgical white, cutting every shadow into precise angles. The room's air felt heavier, pressing down with the weight of what was about to happen. She took the next folder from the line, this one bound in black leather, its corners reinforced with brass. It gave off the faint smell of old ink and money documents that had been kept in vaults, pulled from fireproof cabinets. She placed it squarely before her, and when she unbuckled the brass clasps, the sound carried through the microphones like the snapping of bone. Inside were color-coded dividers, each a different phase of the paper trail. Jasmine pulled out the first divider and laid down a page so thick it looked carved from the tree itself. "This," she said, "is the trust agreement from 1999. It is the origin point for a fund that has moved, in total, over $10 million through intermediaries before landing in the personal accounts of Alexandra Pierce. And before that, in accounts belonging to Caroline Pierce. And before that," she flipped another divider, "in accounts tied to tax-advantaged partnerships controlled by the Trump Organization." The pages made a crisp, slicing sound as she turned them. Trump shifted in his chair. "This is all attorney-client privileged material. You shouldn't even have this." Her response came without a blink. "When veterans lose homes, when children grow up in shelters while funds vanish into beachfront property deeds, Privilege is the last word I want to hear from you." The gallery reacted, audibly low voices murmuring approval, some hands clapping once or twice before being hushed. Jasmine lifted another set of papers, these thinner, with edges smudged from repeated review. They were bank statements, each with columns of numbers neatly highlighted. "Here is the transfer of $2 million from the VA Emergency Housing Fund to Civic Leadership Partners LLC, a shell with no employees, no physical office, and no product. 97% of its disbursements went to 3 accounts belonging to your personal attorney, 1 to Caroline Pierce, and 1 in the name of Alexandra Pierce." From the third row, a woman stood. She wore a plain gray coat and held a folder of her own. "My husband died waiting for the rehab center you promised in our county," she called out, voice breaking. "His name was Samuel Torres. He was 49. Your name was on the flyer." The room froze for a beat. Cameras swiveled toward her, recording every tear, every syllable. Jasmine met the woman's eyes. "Mrs. Torres, I have your husband's file here." She reached into the black leather folder and produced a grainy photograph of the planned rehab site, half-finished walls, weeds growing through concrete. $2.3 million was allocated to this project. Not one veteran in your county received treatment, and while this site rotted, the money moved offshore. Trump's voice was sharper now. "You're exploiting grief for politics. Shameful." Jasmine turned her head slowly toward him, the pause as precise as a surgeon's incision. "You don't steal money, Mr. Trump. You steal time. Samuel Torres's time is gone forever." The sentence landed like a gavel strike. In living rooms and cafes across the country, people repeated it aloud, sending it across text threads with only the word, "exactly." She returned to the black folder, pulling out the final section, a glossy photograph of a property deed. "This," she said, "is a waterfront villa in the Virgin Islands purchased in 2022. It was paid for in full, in cash, 2 months after the last VA housing funds transfer. The listed buyer is Coastal Holdings LLC. The beneficial owner listed on a sworn declaration to the Virgin Islands government is Alexandra Pierce." Trump's jaw tightened so visibly the cameras caught the movement. Outside, the crowd's chant grew louder. In homes across the country, people leaned closer to their screens. On the steps of a veterans hall in Omaha, a small group set up a projector to live stream the hearing, families sitting on folding chairs under the summer heat. Jasmine closed the black leather folder, the brass clasps snapping shut with finality. "I have 3 more, she said, resting her hands on the remaining stack. "Each heavier than the last. We are going to open every single one before you leave this table." Trump glanced toward his legal team. They leaned in, whispering rapidly, but the cameras were already tight on his face, catching the tremor in his lower lip. Jasmine let the pause stretch just long enough to make the weight of the moment settle into every listener's bones. Then she reached for the next folder. Jasmine Crockett's hand lingered over the next folder, a deep burgundy one with edges worn as if it had traveled too many miles and passed through too many hands. The brass clasp was dented, the paper spine creased, as if the truth inside had been fighting to get out for years. She undid the clasp with a quiet click, the kind of sound that makes everyone lean forward without realizing it. From the moment the cover lifted, the air shifted again, heavier, hotter, like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. She drew out the first page, a notarized audit summary, stark black ink on white. "This," she said, "is a federal compliance report from 2023. It tracks every dollar of a $45 million disaster recovery program meant for veterans displaced by hurricane damage in Florida, Texas, and Louisiana. Out of that $45 million, $12 million disappeared in transactions that were hidden in subsidiary ledgers." She flipped the page to reveal photographs, not press photographs, raw, unfiltered shots taken by caseworkers. A shelter in Galveston with no roof, cots covered in mildew. A veteran named Anthony Price, age 54, sitting on an overturned bucket beside the remains of his home. His quote, in Sharpie on the back of the photograph, read, "They told me the money was delayed. My wife died in that delay." Trump leaned toward the mic, his voice low and edged. You're cherry-picking tragedies. Disasters happen. You can't pin a hurricane on me. Jasmine didn't look up from the photographs. No, Mr. Trump. Hurricanes destroy homes. People like you destroy what was left to rebuild them. The murmur from the gallery rolled like distant thunder. Phones lit up with her words. In Denver, a group of veterans watching from a community center erupted into applause, startling the camera crew streaming their reactions live. From the burgundy folder, she pulled a thicker stack contract ledgers printed on cream stock, every line item annotated in red ink. The payments marked here $2.7 million to Harbor Solutions LLC, $1.9 million to Atlantic Shore Consulting, and $4.8 million to Pierce Capital Ventures. The final name appears in Alexandra Pierce's signed incorporation documents. Every payment cleared during the same 7-day period. Trump's jaw worked like he was grinding something down behind his teeth. She reached for a second set of photographs, aerial shots of beachfront construction in the Virgin Islands. This is where your disaster recovery money went. Not to veterans' roofs, but to private decks and infinity pools. She held up one photo high enough for the gallery to see. The construction foreman who took the shot, he's a veteran too. Name's Michael Dunn, age 37. He said, and I quote, "I didn't fight for my country so I could build a playground for a man who abandoned it." The audience's reaction broke through the formal stillness. Some clapped. Others shouted assent. The security officers along the wall didn't move to silence them this time. Jasmine laid the photographs down, her fingers splayed like she was pinning the truth in place. Then she reached for the last document in the burgundy folder, a single, folded piece of paper. The fold was sharp, deliberate, and when she opened it, the creases cracked faintly. It was a signed letter of instruction, directing a bank in Zurich to transfer funds from a U.S. disaster relief account to an offshore trust. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Trump stared at it without speaking. She slid the paper toward him, stopping just short of his reach. You will say it's forged, you will say it's a smear, but you will not say you don't recognize it. For the first time, he looked away, not at his lawyers, not at the gallery, but down into the grain of the wooden desk, as though searching for something that wasn't there. The sound outside swelled, the crowd's chant breaking into individual shouts, names, dates, dollar amounts like a roll call of the forgotten. Jasmine closed the burgundy folder with a deliberate push, its edges aligning perfectly with the others in her stack. "We're not finished," she said, her voice carrying easily over the noise. "There is one final folder. It holds the full map from the VA funds, to the disaster grants, to the personal accounts, to the daughter you denied. And when I open it, there will be nowhere left to run." The cameras caught the faintest movement in Trump's handsaw, tightening, then loosening, then tightening again. Outside, thunder cracked, though the forecast had promised clear skies. Inside, the marble seemed to hum. Jasmine's fingers touched the final folder, midnight blue, heavy enough to bend the wood beneath it.